Looking to have your groceries delivered? Try Instacart. By following the link in the show notes, you can shop multiple stores, get the products you love from local stores, and get your delivery in as fast as 1 hour. Plus, Instacart highlights deals to save you money. And for our listeners, free delivery on your first order over $35. Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from ItalianGenealogy.blog, and I'm here today with Annmarie Young, who's been researching her roots in Avellino. So welcome, Annmarie.
Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. This will be fun. And you're out there in sunny California, yes?
Yes, I'm in Southern California, just visiting family. But I'm living I'm from Northern. I'm living currently in Northern California in Monterey. But yes, I live in California as of right now.
So I'm going to start with the question that I ask everybody who does this is why and when did you start researching your family?
I was always in love with family, always loving to be with family. And even as a little girl, I would always want to ask questions. And then when I got a little older, I would ask more specific questions that were pertaining to, well, was grandpa born in Italy, or, things like that. And then they really didn't know answers. And so that propelled me a little bit more to continue to be my own detective of sorts. And I just wanted to know everything and anything I could. And then with that, more love and passion for my ancestors developed, and family in general, the love for family in general. So that is where, that is pretty much why I started.
And so how long have you been doing the research?
I really remember when I could get on to the internet and it actually would work probably around 2003, when you punch in something on your Ethernet or internet, and that something actually would come up that would be of interest. It wouldn't be too slow. And that's when I really began, because it also was something I could start searching from home. And as a young mother, I was at the time 28, and I had a 3-year-old and a newborn and a computer. So I was able to begin searching at home. I didn't have to go to um, a library or anything like that. Um, and then it just got easier and easier. And of course, then that just made it more fun and exciting as a hobby, because it could be done from home.
Yeah, and that's probably around the same time I started. I want to say probably about 2005, 2006, and pretty much for the same reason. And I think we all have that bug. Everybody I talk to, there always seems to be one or two people in the family that have that bug or calling to want to do the research and find out. And then there's a bunch of people who just really don't care what you find.
I know. And I have had to learn that too.
But I've always been the same way, family oriented. I used to, when I was a kid, well, I was going to say a little bit older than you, but I'm probably a lot older than you. We had the books, with the black pages and the photos with the little tabs with the
Yeah.
corners that you shoved in there. And I used to love that as a kid, having my mom drag out the book and look at the old pictures and ask questions and things like that.
Yes, same here. Same here. I loved looking at pictures and learning about. I felt like I always knew much about my mother's side of the family, and not as much as and in my father's side. And I thought, oh, I'll never know anything about my father's side, because my dad doesn't know anything, like any question. I couldn't get any answers from him. And then it just so happened that it flipped, that I was able to find out so much about my father's side when I really started looking, and not a lot about my mother's side until just this quarantine. So
Oh, wow, that's
I was
interesting.
able, yeah.
What have you found out about your dad's side? Let's start there.
Back in 2003, I only knew, and I'm telling you, they didn't know anything, but I only knew a few things. I knew our Americanized name and spelling. I knew that they were sculptors that came over. I knew that I didn't know if my grandfather was born in Italy or not, but I knew that he lived in Boston, and right in that old Italy area. And I knew that that's where he met my grandmother, and my grandmother also from Italy. And so I put in De Christopher into a 2003 search engine, and the first thing that popped up was uh, a name and a sculpture. And I thought, whoa, it has to be, as kind of my own little detective. I just figured that that had to have a relation, and that is where I started. I started with this man who's a sculptor in Boston, Massachusetts, and then I went to his site, wrote a little letter to him, thinking he'll never answer, and then he did. And we wrote letters back and forth via his little website, and finally found a small connection. And that was my like beginning. I was super excited that I found kind of a distant cousin. And then another thing I did is I didn't know my Italian spelling of the name, so I went in and wrote every way you could write De Christopher, the way that anybody from Italy that would write it a certain way, and I just wrote them all down, and I still have that today. It's like a piece of old paper that I wrote down every way I could find on the internet of how to spell it, because I figured that was a good start. And that's really where I started, and that now I know pretty much. I mean, I just know so much. So I know that my most amazing find with the De Christopher side was something that made me walk on cloud nine for like days. And it was that I really cracked into, well, and found and confirmed the exact city that my grandfather was born in Italy. And the way that I did that was I found a 1917 World War One record of my grandfather, and that was just on the on the ancestry.com. And right there it said that he was born in Torre le Nocelle, Avellino. And it showed, well, then of course I punched that city in, and a genealogy a blog popped up, and I almost was in tears, because once I realized what the blog was, I couldn't believe it. I was so beyond blessed, because what it is someone who has family from there, has done all the research. It's a small town, and they proceeded to take other names and surnames from that town, and help research those names and put it on this blog. And when I searched my grandfather's name, uh, records popped up that I never could find anywhere else, and a ship manifest popped up, and so many other things. And I wrote a thank you letter to the owner of the blog. So grateful. And uh, and I kind of said, this is my grandfather. All I know is when he was born and where he lived in America. And you just opened up my whole world to, him and this town. And then the owner of the blog wrote me back and gave me a cousin that she had a feeling that we were related. And since then, I was able to converse with him, and he's kind of one of those ones that loves doing the ancestry just like myself. So we had a lot in common, and that was back in 2010. I found him, and so we've been talking ever since.
Wow, that's something. That's a great find. And I find with most people I talk to, it kind of happens that way. You need that one little link, and that sets you on a path, and all of a sudden things just start falling out of the sky.
We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with PhilItaly.com. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co.
Yes, especially yes, it's so true. And then, I guess there's kind of a story with all the four surnames, not just a Christopher, but so the way you spell it is Di Cristoforo, and I wish that I had the Italian in me to pronounce it perfectly, but um and my dad always said, we're De Cristoforos with an ORO at the end. And so I knew that he had said that, but then when I found the right spelling, it was ARO at the end. But um, it was just a little touch different. But when you have that correct spelling, yeah, things just open up.
Your grandfather, was he a stoneworker when he came, or was he doing sculptures, or what did he do when he came
Yeah,
over?
he was the baby of the family and came over with his mother at 11, came to meet up with his father and two brothers. And it is interesting. I mean, yes, his father was a stone cutter, and lived in Boston. And up until the last census I found on his father, it said that he worked in a quarry, stone cutting. And I know now when you look up De Christopher, there's a company, De Cristoforo Brothers or De Christopher Brothers, that are distant, that live in Pennsylvania, that um, kept up with the stone cutting, and they have a business where they do grave tombstones.
Hmm.
And I think that's just where they had their success. So my grandfather, no, he did something completely different. The World War One registry, he was young and early married, and he put in that he was a trash collector. But what I had known of him, and what I then saw later in his censuses and in his World War II registry, was that he was a detective for the Pinkerton Agency. And the way that I had learned about the Pinkerton Agency is it's the beginnings of like the FBI. And if you ever look into like how Abraham Lincoln's assassin was found, the Pinkerton Agency was the one who kind of helped in that. And so it was a very old detective agency, but he was part of that. So that's what he did until he passed in 1950.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Yeah, that's neat.
Yeah, thank you.
The four grandparents were all Italian. Yeah.
Yes, they were all from Italy. There was only one who was born in Boston, but her parents were both from Italy and Avellino area. So and some of her sisters just went right back and stayed in Italy. So they had many kids, and so she was born in Boston, but they were all she knew was Italian, and but yeah, they were all born in the Avellino area. So when I look at I did do my DNA, and I'm 96% uh, Campania region, southern Italy, Avellino, and I just know that that's where all of them now are. Now that I've researched that they've all come from that area in little cities around there.
Yeah,
So
well, that's kind of the way it worked. I mean, my mom's family, all four of my grandparents were born in Italy, and um, some of my aunts and uncles were born there too. Some of the older aunts and uncles, but my mom's family was from Bari, um, in Puglia, and my dad's parents were from Naples. And my connection to Avellino is that my ninth great grandfather was Prince Marino Caracciolo, and he owned Avellino and Atrapalda and a bunch of different little towns around there. And he was the prince and
wow.
a duke and a count and the marquis and all these other things in that general area. And the way I found that out is going back to the pictures. My mom, one of the things in the book was a card from not my great grandma, my grandmother's dad, Nicola Piramalo. And the card said he was from the Dukes of Capricata. And so that's where I started my whole journey, trying to find him. And I figured, well, I might find a little something interesting, with this man. And I did. I did find out, his grandparents, and she was the Duchess, and his grandfather was the Count, and of different parts of southern Italy. But my great grandmother, her family goes back to in Naples to 950 A.D. And her family,
Wow.
pretty much in various stages of husbands and wives and spouses and all of that, were just huge in the southern part of Italy. And that name, they intermarried with the Spanish. So I was able to trace that family back to the kings of Spain and the kings of France and the kings of England and all that
Oh,
kind of stuff
wow.
through this one little card. And uh, what made it easy was once I found a certain link, everything was so well documented. And I don't take anything at face value. I have to be sure, and I have to find the records. And I finally got in touch with somebody in the U.S. who he documents mainly what they call gateway ancestors. A gateway ancestor is somebody who brings you back to English royalty. And I asked him, and I said, "Do you see these names? Can you tell me that if am I right?" And when I gave him, I think it was my third or fourth great grandfather, he said, "Yeah." He says he's documented, and I could do charts for you on this, and he did. So
Wow.
it was, pretty amazing. And I'm so desperate on my searches to find somebody who I could help or link back. But it's so hard in Italy because people didn't talk about it when they came. Even my grandmother didn't talk about it. The only thing that my cousins would tell me is that she used to tell them, my older cousins, she used to tell them that her cousin was the princess. And they thought she was
Huh.
just this crazy old lady. But it was true. Her cousin was the princess. Her great grandfather
Wow.
was the prince. Actually, her grandfather was the prince. And I've since been able to find cousins from both families, Caracciolo and Piramalo, in Italy, because my grandmother, she was the only Piramalo other than her aunt that came to America. And none of the Caraccialos that I could find from that family came over to America. And why would they? There was no reason for them to come
Right.
because they were well off. And so I was able to find, the records and things like that. So
Oh, that's so fantastic.
it was like, yeah, and something, I never expected to find. And, conversely, my mom's family, my great grandfather owned a cow. And that was his claim to fame. He would,
Yeah.
when my grandparents came, they left my oldest uncle in Italy, and he would walk the streets with my great grandfather with the cow. And if you wanted milk, you would signal from the window or whatever, and he would milk the cow in front of the door and fill up your bucket.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's so nice. You know those little details. Those are the best.
Well, one thing, because I never asked when I was young, but one thing that I had found out just recently, after all these years of research, is that my youngest cousin from my Uncle John, Uncle Giovanni, we called him Uncle John, he interviewed my uncle in Barres before my uncle passed away, and he had him on tape.
Oh, that's
And
so wonderful.
And I asked him, could you translate it? And he said, I tried once. He said, but he said, I couldn't do it. I got all broken up. I couldn't do it. And I told him, I says, Joe, you have to. Yeah, this is the family history. You have to do this. So he said he had hours of tape, but he said, my father would repeat things and tell the stories different. He says, so I condensed it down to about 3 pages. But we basically have the history of, my uncle from 1915 till he didn't come with his family till 1950. So he didn't see my grandmother or had never met his brothers and sisters for 45 years.
Oh, wow.
Wow. So, they were there during the war. They were there during the Depression. I mean, the stories were just fantastic.
Oh, my goodness. That's so great. Wonderful.
And just like you said, the internet these days is a wonderful thing, So going back to your family, what else did you find about, whether it's your grandfather's family, your grandmother's family?
We'll be right back.
Lafayette, we are here. The French history podcast for the American public by a Frenchman. Learn all about France's fascinating history, its great characters like Charlemagne, Joan of Arc, Louis XIV, or Napoleon, but also the great events that marked France, Europe, and sometimes the whole world. Lafayette, we're here. Available wherever you get your podcast or on LafayettePodcast.com. À bientôt.
Yeah. So my grandmother married, the detective Anthony to Christopher, and that's how he was known. And her last name is Venuti, and she was the oldest of 11 children, and they lived in Revere, Massachusetts for a little time, and that is where her parents and his parents were. And I have one picture, and I cherish it of that generation of his parents. And they met and married there in 1914. They were married in the Old North Church, which now you can't get married there anymore. It's kind of like just a touristy. At least I've never been. One day I'll be able to go. But they moved after many years to Brooklyn, New York, and they had 10 children. 11, one passed, but they had 10 and lived on St. Mark's Avenue. And then that's where my dad, who was second to the youngest, he was born in 1933. And I'm his youngest. So that's why I'm kind of stuck with the generation that everyone says you're that's your dad, but he had me when he was later in life. 41. That's not really late, but um, anyway, and so they lived in Brooklyn, and that's how my mother met my father, and they were married in Brooklyn in 1956, and her parents, Giordano, that was her surname, and he married a Tropiano, and who's from Atrapalda, which you had mentioned earlier.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and her mother came over with her, and they came on the boat, and that's the story I had started with, because I thought, oh, I know a lot about my mom's side, and my mom told me the story where the Tropianos came over, and and they had a dandelion farm in Avellino, and doing a little more research, there's so many little towns in that area. And so Atrapalda and I can't really pronounce them all. I can write them, but there's just a lot of little towns all around there. And she had children in different towns, but they were just all very close. And I like Tavernola, San Felice is one of them. Um, and so anyway, I just learned all of that from the ship manifests. Um, and she came over with her brothers and her sisters, and they all settled right by the Navy Street, or like right in that old, in Brooklyn, that area.
Yeah, I know exactly where you mean, by the Navy Yard. Yep,
Yes,
I
because
know exactly where it is.
she said that my grandmother said when she was really young, her and her best friend, Bella Petrella was her name, and they would look at the Navy boys, coming and going, and so I know little stories like that. I guess just because my mom must have just learned from her mom, and we just would talk. So anyway.
No, I know exactly. I lived in New York City most of my life, or New Jersey, but I grew up in Queens, so I know exactly what you mean. And my dad was a photographer for the New York Daily News for 38 years, and he was assigned in Brooklyn for about half of that, maybe a little bit more. So
Oh, wow.
he was always there taking pictures.
Well, my mom grew up in then it was the Italian, of Flatbush.
Yep.
So that's where my mom grew up, and then wherever St. Mark's lands, I don't know, I don't think that's Flatbush, but he was 660 St. Mark's Avenue, and it was a fancy little house, even in those days, and now it still is a really pretty little house. So anyway, he had 4 brothers and 5 sisters. So there was 10 of them in the house that they lived in.
Yeah, well, that's the way it was back then. My dad his family was relatively small for Italians back then. He had 5 in his family. My mom's parents, they had 11. Two died in Italy before they came. And then, like I said, my one uncle was left there, and my aunt, she was about 1.5 or 2 years old, my oldest aunt, when she came over, and then the rest were born here. But I mean, I'm lucky. I actually have some photographs from Italy from my dad's family with his older brother and his 2 older sisters, with their grandparents, or their grandfather and his second wife. My great grandmother died when she was very young. She was only like about 40. And I also have a photograph of my grandmother that I think was around 1900. But they had money, so they had this kind of stuff. They had these
Right.
photographs. But I
Right.
actually do have, and they must have taken it to send to my grandparents. I actually have my Uncle John with his grandparents, and he looks to be about maybe 5 or 6. So they must have taken that photograph to send to my grandparents when he was very, very young, because studio photograph for a poor family from Bari, I don't think was going to happen very often. Or maybe my grandmother
Right.
maybe they sent some money over or something like that. So we're lucky in that respect that we actually do have some photographs like that.
Yeah, yeah, we have a couple from Italy. They took pictures, but it's just of my grandparents, my mother's grandparents and my father's grandparents. I'm still searching for my grandmother on my father's side. Her a picture of them, and I know it exists because they were married in Boston, and they had enough children to somewhere someone has a picture of them. Just have to find it.
Yeah, well, I wound up with a few photographs that I never knew existed. I found a cousin, or she found me. Um, and I knew that my grandmother's aunt was here. Her name was Maria Piramalo, and she came in 1905 with her husband. And I could never figure out why my grandmother came in the first place until I found that link, because there was, by that time I had known that she came from a well-off family. But then I said, well, her aunt was here. Maybe they convinced them, or for whatever reason, they decided to come. And I got a message on Ancestry from my cousin Linda. She's like a third cousin or fourth cousin, and she said, "I think we're researching the same person, and we might be related." And so she gave me the name. I said, "Yeah, that's my grandfather's sister." And she said, "Are you sure?" I said, "There's no question. I know for a fact that everything falls into place." So anyway, to fast forward, it turned out that her grandmother her name was Beatrice, and Beatrice Petex. And I remember when I was young, my mother and father saying they were going over to see Aunt Beatrice and Petex. Little did I know at the time that Linda and actually her mom, her cousin's mom, her first cousin's mom, lived in the same house with the grandmother in Flushing, and we lived, I don't know, 5 or 6 miles from there.
Oh.
And I never knew Linda. Maybe I met Aunt Beatrice when I was a little kid. She was really my father's cousin, but you know how Italians are, everybody's aunt. If they're older than you, they're aunt somebody.
Yeah.
So we start putting all of these pieces together, and she says, well, Charles, her cousin, his mom lived with the grandmother. And it turned out that my first cousin, Nancy, was Charles's mother's maid of honor. My father
Oh, wow.
took the wedding pictures, because that's what my father did in the 50s. As a sidebar to doing the daily news, he would take wedding pictures. Charles's mom worked for my grandfather. My grandfather and his brother had an embroidery business where they would make bridal crowns and bridal veils.
Uh-huh.
Well, she worked for them. So all of these things were going on,
goodness.
and I had no idea. And then when she told me where, she said, my grandmother lived on Booth Memorial Avenue in Queens, right by the World's Fair. And I said, well, yeah, I lived 5 blocks from there. And I kind of had this flashback to going to look at the apartment where we lived that was being vacated by my first cousin. She was buying a house, and my first wife and I were getting married. And she said, why don't you could come and look at our place. The timing was right. And I kind of remember driving past this house and my father saying, Aunt Beatrice lives there. But I was 21 years old, and, who was paying any attention to anything that was I wasn't paying any attention to anything my father said. Just let's go look at the apartment. Um, so I must have been passing Charles and Linda on the street in Flushing for 5 years or 4 years, and not having any idea not knowing that they even existed. So all of this stuff fell into place until about a little over a year ago. Linda came up from Texas, and Charles lives over here in New Jersey, not too far away. And they came over the house, and she actually brought me beads from my grandfather's shop that her grandmother had saved.
Oh, that's so wonderful. I love that. Was that one
Isn't
of
that
your
crazy?
amazing? Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, this was extremely amazing. And when I talked to one of my older cousins and I told him that my grandmother had family here, he said, "No, I don't think so. No, she was the only." And I said, "No, Paul, this is all falling into place here." And then I started throwing names out to him, and he said, "Oh yeah, we used to go visit them in New Jersey." And I said, "Well, why would you go visit these people in New Jersey if they weren't related to you?" Because he's my cousin Paul used to live with my grandmother, but he's I don't know, he's about 14, 15 years older than me. So, he knew these people. They would go, like I said, they would go visit them.
Oh, wow.
But one of the coolest things that I got from Linda was she gave me a little blurb from a local newspaper from Scotch Plains, New Jersey, which is where my father was born for some strange reason. I don't know why. I haven't figured that out, why they were there. But
It's where my uncle lives right now.
really? Yeah. Well, my father was born there.
Aw.
But some of the family was in New Jersey, so that's probably why. And it was some kind of, I don't remember if it was, I think it was an obituary or something like that of one of my grandmother's family over in Italy. And just recently, I don't know, a month and a half ago, Ancestry opened up the newspaper.com for free. So I went in there and I started researching this little New Jersey Courier newspaper, and I found all of these cool articles from my grandmother and grandfather, and some of the funniest ones were my Aunt Julia motored to Brooklyn to spend 2 weeks with family. That's just the way it says.
Oh, I know. I have a subscription to newspapers.com. I find it so helpful, and that's what they did in back in many years ago. That's what they would say, that in the little towns, so and so is visiting for the weekend at their Aunt Ruth's or whatever, and
Yeah.
it's those was pretty good news, I guess, for the day.
Yeah, it seemed to be a big deal, and just little blurbs about so and so attended somebody's birthday party, and they even listed the gifts on one of them. She got this gift or that gift.
Oh, that's so fun. That's great. Yeah, I have found newspaper.com to be an amazing source. Any of those that show the newspapers and articles. And I find that anybody who loves ancestry or has a desire to know more, I will ask them questions about their family, and I will go home and I love to find things. So newspapers.com, I'll punch in, something of their family, and it helps me find like articles of the day. And then I love that's some fun gifts I give to my friends is things about their family. And I just love that they love, that's a gift that's personal. And I've actually found many things and miraculous things for other people that I just love to do. It's so fun when they find out amazing finds that they wouldn't do on their own, because they just don't have the that hobby and all of the experience I have when searching.
Oh, that's great.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It must come naturally, right? I don't know. It just to us.
Well, I think that's part of it, and I also think, and I've talked to other people, there's something I think, in our DNA or just something, calling, whatever you want to say, that some of us just seem to have that attachment and that need to find out this stuff.
It is. It doesn't leave me.
No.
I'll even think of it in the night, or in fact, I have had several amazing finds. But about 2 years ago, I have grew up Catholic. My godparents were my father's brother and his wife, and his wife was from northern New York, and they met and married about the same time as my mom and my dad married. And I mean, I just knew them. They would come visit. They were my godparents. They would give me gifts. They would write me letters, and and I just knew them on the surface. I guess I went right around. I guess 3 or 4 years ago, I would ask, "Well, do you know anything about them?" And they said they were the most mysterious people. We don't know anything much about them. So I kept the desire, and it was in my heart. And when I would get that feeling, I don't know how to describe it. Um, I I would start to, look up what I was thinking, or go towards a thought and just kind of follow it. And I began to piece together their lives to the point of I know everything about them, especially my aunt, who was completely a mystery, not related to me by blood, but my aunt and my godmother, um, and they just were in shock when I was able to even show the paper of all the things. It was confirmed, um, and when I had found out that she was a member of the Five Nations, the Iroquois,
Oh,
um,
wow. That's cool.
Mohawk.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we kind of knew only she was Native American. But then I'd say, well, that's broad. Is there a tribe that she's with, or how do I not know? And it would bother me. But she had passed away, and I couldn't ask her. And and then we were in northern New York, and we were in Syracuse, and then we were even in this little town of Nedrow, my family and I. And I found a little piece of information, a wedding certificate, that she was previously married to a man. And it said that she lived currently in Nedrow, New York. And I just thought, wow, I'm in Nedrow, New York, this little town, and she, that's part of her history. And it kind of just, I thought, well, how did she come to Brooklyn and just meet my uncle? And my uncle didn't, he was in World War II and a hero, and Iwo Jima, and he was one of those survivors that they don't talk about it, but that's like the true heroes just don't speak, that's
Right.
kind of, he just was an amazing guy. And I thought, how did he meet her? And so anyway, I would ask a few people. They said, oh, she was a cigarette girl. And then I looked up, well, what does that even mean? And I saw pictures of cigarette girls, and I could kind of imagine a story in my mind, how they met. And I don't know, do you know what cigarette girls are?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know. And they were just dressed as so cute with their little apron, and they would pass out cigarettes in the 50s or whatever. So anyway, and then I thought, well, what made her come to Brooklyn? I want to know, like, how did she get from one place to the next? And I was right around that Navy Yard where you were saying you understand where that was. And I was driving, and my heart was pumping, and I started just snapping photos, just random photos. And I said to my husband and my kids, you guys, I have this desire to know about my aunt, and I'm getting this like feeling so strong, and I'm snapping photos because I really have a feeling that this street or this area is an important part. And so I went down, I knew now what tribe she was from and where her mother was from. And um, and I started to punch in, in the computer, Brooklyn and the little street, and and just things like that, and their tribe. And there was an area in Brooklyn called Little Catanagua. Little something. I probably am not pronouncing it correctly, but what it was that was the Mohawk Indians, the Mohawk Native Americans were part of the ironwork. They were the iron workers.
Yes, I was going to say that, yeah.
And they had a section in Brooklyn that they lived in, and it was right where I was taking photos. And I just said, you guys see that sometimes you don't, like, you just find out when you really, really want to know. I was I'm still amazed by it. The fact that I took the photos, I knew something was going on because I had felt it previously before, those callings and those nudges and so I was so excited that I found that little area was part of her, and I know that that's where she was, and then went to become a cigarette girl or whatever she was at that time, and a waitress for juniors was another thing that I had found out, which was right down there in Brooklyn, and that's where my mom worked her very first job, as at the Metropolitan Life Insurance in the early 50s. And so anyway, I was just fascinated that I found out all of that, and became became members of Facebook group, groups that would be part of the Iroquois and try to learn, their history and story. And from there, I found out about the Thomas Indian School. And I don't know if you're familiar with the schools that they had, about 5 of them. And anyway, I looked at them and read about them, and ended up finding all of my aunt's files from that school, and the rest. I mean, it's just amazing. So that was one of my most amazing finds.
No, that is something, and I don't know. I don't believe this is. I don't think it's accidental. And I
No,
had
I know.
I spoke to somebody, and they said they said to me, they want to be found. They
Yeah.
want people to know, and call me crazy.
I know. I believe the way you're describing. And after I knew her whole history, it was a sad history, because she was put into when she was born, like 7 days old. She was kind of not adopted, but given to the the society that takes newborns that aren't wanted at the time. The mother couldn't care for them. This was 1926, and she was in that setting, and then moved to the Thomas Indian School, which they closed in the 40s, or 1950 or something, was like the ending of that whole era. But anyway, and so I was able to really find out her information, and I think she did want to know. I think there was something there, and I was able to find out her story. So, and I still have more to do. I've been writing a little history about her so that I could share it with all of my family. And her history will be written down so that they know.
I couldn't find the Sorrentino family at all in Italy. I was having just complete roadblocks. So I had hired somebody mainly to do that, and he came back with some stuff on the Piramalo family at first, which was great because it helped me confirm some of the things I thought I knew. But my cousin, who lives with my grandparents, she was, I don't know, 5 years older than me, I guess. I hadn't heard from Italy for probably almost a year. no word on the Sorrentinos, and I had pretty much just forgot about it, to be honest with you. And my cousin Louise passed away, and 2 days later, I got a data dump from Italy with about 50 records from the Sorrentino family. So coincidence, maybe, but
No, I don't know. There's no such thing. That's how I feel. If there's a desire in our hearts, I just feel like we're led to it. And being part of the DNA, what I was able to do, they have the DNA matches,
Mhm.
and oftentimes, well, I would go on the matches, and I saw a few that were really related to me, and I thought, I don't know these people. And so they would write me letters, or I would write them letters. But anyway, it was amazing that I found a second cousin that was adopted, and I was able to connect him to his family. It was the neatest. It was
Oh,
so
that's cool.
special.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so special. And he lives in Queens. And one of his questions was, well, do you have family in Queens? And I laughed because I have so much family in Queens and Comac and Long Island and everywhere. And I didn't quite at first want to answer. I just wanted to kind of hear his story. That's a sensitive, when someone is wanting to find their biological family, I didn't want to like hurt anyone or, mess up or so, but it all worked out. And it's amazing. Like I gave his dream. He had a dream to find his biological family, and I led him to them, and it just makes me feel so good. And the aunt I was earlier talking about, and my uncle, my godparents, they, a girl, I had a first cousin on Ancestry I never knew about, and we began to talk back and forth, and she was their child. And that was an amazing find because I had just researched them. And so when she said, this is the name on my papers of my biological mother, like I knew how to place her, and it was okay because they had both passed away, and I didn't feel like I was hurting anyone in any way, and so I have these wonderful relationships with these beautiful people now, and they still to this day will text me and thank me for helping them find their family. So, and I found them. So I just feel very blessed to have the calling or the little talent, something that I was given to help people.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I just love talking about it. I love hearing people's stories, and it'll be fun to listen to. You could play this for people instead of just writing it down. So
I know. Thank you. I felt very special to be a part of this, and it's true. I have to find the people who enjoy, this hobby, and I enjoyed talking with you and hearing your stories, and so it's nice that we both have that in common. And so I loved being part of this. I wasn't boring you in any way.
not at all. No, I love it. I love it. All right. Well, thanks again.
Okay. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thanks for listening. Follow us on Facebook in the Italian Genealogy group or at www.italiangenealogy.blog.